whatever has been happening indefinitely. And and I know Tharu and Florian, you two are very well versed in our history, or especially Jewish history. Now I'm not so sure. I'm not. I don't mean that as an insult, but I do know this: that the general cyclical history of the Jew is one where they infect and they make their host nation sick, and then they get showed. And it's
more or less, yeah.
And it's
rightfully so.
And it's the same thing with the Islamization of Europa. I mean, I want to find a book on it. If anyone of you have a recommendation, but when Spain, for the most part, was Islamic for a good number of years, and then I think it was at the Crusade or the Inquisition that just swept them out of fucking Europe.
The Those Crusades. The Asturias Reconquista.
Yes. So it can happen. It will happen. And Tharo, with everything that you mentioned with the dialectic, makes total sense. And I don't want to LARP too much for Hitler, but it's funny because he mentions his issues with Jews, and I think he mentioned epigenetics. I'm not going to quote word for word, but for the most part, Hitler says to argue with a Jew is like to slam your fist down or your hand down on jelly. For the most part, it just forms around your fingers, splits apart, and reforms later as you relieve pressure. And then even if you do defeat them in an argument, the next day it'll be as if it never happened. And it's the same thing from today to Hitler's day to beyond. Like, you get people like Ben Shapiro, right, arguing, still hating on Trump despite having lost most, if not all, his credibility with the Michelle Fields incident. But still, he continues on as it never happened. So I didn't mean to stomp.
No, it's good. I think this brings up a good point. Is that we and I've linked you. This isn't specifically with the Reconquista, but there's a book here called "Christian Slaves, Muslim Masters: White Slavery in the Mediterranean," it's a good starting point for what you were talking about the sort of Islamization of Europe, and it's a good historical context. Just one point, I see Nat looking for a break. Your point, 2 points. Sorry. First, you can't argue with Jews, because it's like slamming your fist down on jelly.
Subhumans, yeah.
But what you can do, and this is you bring up a good point through this, is what you can do is you can go after the people they're using, and you can appeal to them, and you sort of like from a military context, you take out their assets, because they use other people as military assets because they suck. They're pieces of.
You got me right. You got me right in my wheelhouse about that type of analogy.
Right. Right. And so you go after what they use to advance their own agenda, and you sort of pull the rug out from under them.
You cut the cake, in other words.
Yeah. Yes. Basically. So the second point, before we go on break, I just wanted to. This goes back to sort of like the value of allies and if you don't like the word color, you just say allies of other, basically people who are non-white. So when I was looking at I was researching this Soghomon Tehlirian. If you go down, and I eventually found my way back to the wiki page for the wiki page for the Ottoman Empire, and I went down to the decline and modernization. And there was an interesting, there it is. All right. So there's an interesting paragraph regarding the decline and modernization. So the Armenian genocide takes place in like the second decade of the 1900s, like 1920, somewhere around there. So the wiki article outlines the decline and modernization of the Ottoman Empire from 1828 to 1908. So the modernization ended right before the Armenian genocide. Well, one of the paragraphs talks about basically Jews. And so I'm just going to read it real quick because it is interesting, and it's your coincidence detector goes off immediately. The Christian population of the empire, owing to their higher educational levels, started to pull ahead of the Muslim majority, leading to much resentment on the part of the latter. In 1861, there were 571 primary and 94 secondary schools for Ottoman Christians, with 140,000 pupils in total. In turn, the higher education levels of Christians allowed them to play a large role in the economy. In 1911, the 654 wholesale companies in Istanbul, 528 were owned by ethnic Greeks. Of course, it would be a mistake to ignore the geopolitical dimensions of this dynamic. The preponderance of Christian merchants owed not to any innate business sense on their part, which is bullshit, although plenty of European observers were keen on making this point. In fact, in many cases, Christians and also Jews were able to gain protection from European consuls and citizenship, meaning they were protected from Ottoman law and not subject to the same economic regulations as their Muslim comrades. So this is misleading, but basically, people will call this confirmation bias, whatever, fuck them. You look at, and so you see this mention of Jews. Well, if you go on through and you read this specific paragraph, they mention the protection from European consuls and citizenship. Basically, what was going on is the Jews were setting up banks in the Ottoman Empire, and then they were being protected by the European banks, and they were offering loans to the Ottoman Empire to consolidate their debt. And you see, basically, exactly. And so you see, if you do research on these people who were running the Ottoman Empire right up to the modernization, right before the Armenian genocide, they're all either native Armenians or Turks being controlled by Jewish bankers, European bankers. And the way they could control them is offering them these debt consolidations, or they're just Jews themselves, parading themselves around as, white Christians or Armenian Muslims. And then you get the genocide. This is the genocide. Basically, apparently, is the result of the end result of the Crimean War, where 90% of Circassians were ethnically cleansed. And so, it's not just whites who are being subverted. It's anybody who's non-Jewish. And if you can appeal to, and the historical record shows this, so if you can appeal to the historical record and say, look, when they say white, what they mean is Jewish. Like, did you know the first American slavers were Jews? They were the ones buying up all the slaves and transporting them over to Africa. And people will look at you, and if you've already broken the anti-Semitic knee-jerk reaction, then you can have a really good discussion about this. And so that's the point. But I want to sort of caution and say I'm not appealing to these sort of quote unquote allies of other by saying they should be allowed in our societies. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we use them as a strategic tool in our own, to further our own interests, much like the Jews do.
That's a very excellent segment, Tharu. Thank you. It was actually, I feel like I want to start another podcast just to talk about how banking is used to control peoples. But alas, we're going to take a quick break, 10-minute break, guys, and we'll finish up the podcast.
All right.
Sounds good.
Yes.
We'll talk. We'll probably talk about the faggot question later. Hey, welcome back, everyone. Our break. Tharu, you had three more points to bring up, and in fact, I'd say take your time. I mean, the show notes are just a suggestion, and I think it's more important that the goys listening engage in what I call this gentlemanly smoking room conversation, intellectual, but
we smart nigga.
Yeah, it's a safe space for our crime think. So, however long you think you need, those last 3 points were very compelling, and I think people need to hear them. So,
Okay, sure enough. So the last 3 points are essentially the first one is you know we need to have a willingness to sacrifice, right? And so by sacrifice, one of the things that really keeps us, or in my opinion, that is keeping the alt-right or these nationalist movements kind of sort of relatively weak is our inability to be public. Right. And now I'm not advocating for people to dox themselves. Don't dox yourself. We are going to come to a point where we can no longer remain anonymous on Twitter or online, and we're going to have to sacrifice something. I mean, Hitler sacrificed 2 years in jail. You look at the people he if you read Mein Kampf, he dedicates the book to 14 National Socialist Party members who gave their lives before the party, while the party was trying to sort of seize power. And so, I'm not advocating that we go to Trump rallies and armed to the teeth and stuff like that, but we are going to have to make a conscious decision at some point to sacrifice some of our own comfort in order to. This brings me into the second to last of these points. We are going to need to sacrifice some of our own relative comfort in order to support each other, and I think that's a really, really important point. So, probably one of the most important points is that the white diaspora is so, just to use the word diasporic, we are stretched so thin. We don't have large blocks of communities, and now this is intentional, right? We are split up on purpose so that we can't form any sort of collective, cohesive, unified communities. If we see someone being attacked who is on our